Grinders. Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka BlenderHD, BlenderHD. You're going to follow me on Twitter. And it's Monday, October 16th, and you know what we do on Mondays. It's Mondays with MCCOOL. We bring in James MCCOOL, the co-author, with me on the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. First off, James, before we talk about DFS, did you see the Lombardi tweet?
Yeah, I did. How analytics doesn't know who's on the field.
Right. I just wanted to point that out but of course, as analytics people, we always have to make fun of people that are stupid.
Does anybody look stupider than somebody trying to talk about analytics who doesn't understand analytics?
Or someone that doesn't even understand the definition of the word analytics, that analytics just means math. Right. Analytics never know who's on the field, and whoever on the field, it matters more than numbers. It's like analytics literally knows who's on the field. Like that's kind of the point.
It's crazy. It's crazy stuff. New cat in the background, by the way. We had an instance.
Does it matter what cat's in the background? Does analytics care about what cat's in the background?
So analytics might not care, but Kershaw cares. He's not super big fan so far of the other cat, so he's sleeping and napping, but if he wakes up and finds out the other cat is in his space, we might have some cat fights on the show today. So dealing with that. But it was weird, man. Like this last week was really weird. So this new cat decided to just stroll into my house. Just strolled on in and made itself at home. We've been trying to find its owner for like 5 days or something like that. Nothing. So now we just have a new cat. Her name's Belly.
Oh, so you named the cat as well?
Named cat. Cat's named.
Okay, hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. Give me those thummy thumbs. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. Good morning to everyone in the chat. Jose Morales asks, if you're only playing one lineup on DK, who would you put in the captain spot tonight? My suggestion would be Jose. Click on that link in the description. Get $10 off your first month of a RotoGrinders premium membership. You get all of our content, all of our projections. Okay, so what I would do is that I would just, obviously depends on what contest you're in, right? The payout structure of the contest, and run high projected lineups that also have lower ownership, and then play one of those lineups. So who is in the captain spot does not matter. The lineup matters. And if you ran the Sims, James, RotoGrinders is coming out we're coming out with the Sims thing.
I'm excited.
Very shortly.
I'm excited to see that.
Very shortly. It's just a preview because I have been testing it to some degree. It is not like around the internet. It's hard. It's on a scale of 1 to 10 on like what type of user our Sims product is going to be based on. Like a lot around the industry are kind of assuming you're like a 7 or an 8. Like you kind of know what the hell's going on. This one's more for like 2s and 3s. Okay. So the amount of features and not like the features and options, it's more if you're a RotoGrinders premium member and you get our projections here and our ownership, all of our stuff is powered. The top stacks and the slate IQs and the sim tools for showdown and everything is all powered in our back end here at RotoGrinders. Now we're giving you the option to kind of have a front-facing interface of that to choose lineups based on the contest that you play and look at lineups that correlate with those statistics. So that's a better way of putting it. So it's not going to be the type of thing where it's like, oh yeah, I could upload my own stuff and change everything around. It's more like, no, if you use our stuff, right, and you need a lineup for this type of contest and this type of thing, and you want a high-risk lineup, a low-risk lineup, one with a high cash rate, a low cash rate, a higher 1% rate, like you could configure all that. And if you want, I want to play this guy, you could just say, I just want to see lineups with that guy. I want to see lineups that have these statistics as far as cash rate and everything, but has to have a stack of these players. it'll just show you that, right? Like that's kind of what it's meant for. And we're getting a demonstration internally, the company wide today, right? Even though
cool.
I've looked at it before, so that should be out soon. So I just wanted to let everyone know about that. But how was your Sunday? My Saturday was better than Sunday. My Saturday in college football props was amazing. Yesterday, NFL props was good, but my every decision I could have made in my 3v3 and DraftKings Cash was wrong.
Yeah.
And I still ended up winning almost 50% of my head-to-heads, but didn't make it in most of the double ups. And I felt like it was that type of week where there were a lot of options in similar zones to play. Like, and if you stayed in those zones, you probably did well, but it really just depended on like what 6 to 7K running back did you take, right? What 8K to $9,500 wide receiver did you take? What 4K, 5K wide receiver did you like? But it was like you take a look at like who did well, and it's not like the chalk didn't hit. The chalk pretty much, like if you stayed to that kind of the higher owned player pool, you probably did pretty well.
Yeah, it was a really weird week. I think I won like 40% of my head-to-heads. I was kind of like you. I think that I made like 1 2v2 wrong. Maybe it might have been a 3v3, but I think it was a 2v2. Most people
What did you score in DraftKings Cash? What was your score?
131.94.
Okay, so I did better than you.
Yeah, I think. Well, like I said, I lost. I think that the 2v2 that I lost was I went Kamara Foreman, and I think people went Hubbard Etienne. Maybe
well, I didn't do either, but I mean, but you're on the right track as far as
or Kyron
Kamara
Williams
wasn't necessarily as owned in cash.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm bringing up my cash lineup in a $25 massive single entry thing. Like looking at my lineup, like I'm assuming in DraftKings Cash. I mean, your strategy is typically you want to play the highest owned lineup, and me, I'm trying to play the highest projected lineup out of a bunch of like 20 top lineups, and the variance effects of all of them. My kind of 3v3 were like, do I play Burrow and Jacobs, or do I play Stafford and Etienne?
Sure.
And then the other one was, do I play Logan Thomas or do I play Kyle Pitts? And I did. If I would have just played Pitts over Thomas, I would have been fine. I mean, I was like 3 points behind the cash line or 2 points behind the cash line, right? And if I played Stafford Etienne, then I also get there. And then if I had to go from the Bears to the Buccaneers defense, that would have been fine. I think I need to do that with the Stafford Etienne lineup. But I was fine. But I mean, everything else in my lineup was staying put. Like I was going to play Mostert, Kyron Williams, Chase, Kirk, Downs. Right. I wasn't going to pay for Evan Ingram at tight end. I did on FanDuel. And then, this lineup that I played was out of the top 20 lineups. Like it was like number 3. And like the top 10 lineups are all within a half a point of each other. So it's like it really came down to like that Logan Thomas, Kyle Pitts projection. It came down to the differences between Jacobs, Etienne, and David Montgomery at 7,300. And the differences between the Bears defense and the Buccaneers defense and the Lions defense, it's 2,700. Everything else was kind of like in place. Like it also came down to whether or not you thought playing Chuba Hubbard or a cheap running back was worthwhile. And if you did, most likely you landed, instead of Josh Downs, you landed on Marquise Brown and Evan Ingram. It felt like I stick to the macro a lot when it comes to building cash lineups. And I'm not going to pay up a tight end unless it's Kelsey. Right. So it's like, I'm going to be on the low end of tight end. I'm going to be there were some lineups in the top 20 half of those lineups had 49ers defense at 4K in them with Chuba Hubbard, and I'm like I don't pay for defense in cash games. I'm sorry. I don't the projections are too fragile at DST for me to spend my salary at DST. So I'm paying down. So I eliminate those lineups, and that's how. Other than Jacobs, the Bears defense was only 3% owned.
Yeah.
In double ups, and Jacobs was 6%, right? But these are workhorse running backs. I don't mind, but so you played Foreman over Hubbard in that type of kind of cheap running back lineup. Did you pay up at tight end?
Yeah, I did. I played Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram's ownership projection was considerably higher than Logan Thomas, and when the cards flipped, and I saw that Logan Thomas was like 24% in the millie, that was the first thing that I was blown away by this week.
Had you known that, you would have played Logan Thomas.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%,
and done even worse.
Well, I don't think I would have done worse if I play him. How much was he? 3,500.
3,500. So you have 1,000 in salary.
Yeah, I'd have done worse.
So what was your cash lineup on DraftKings then?
I went Stafford, Kamara, Mostert, Chase, Kirk, Marquise Brown, Evan Ingram, and Devin Foreman or Deontay Foreman with the Lions defense.
Okay, no, that was a popular line. So you played what was a popular line.
Yeah, and like that, I was fine with that lineup. But I will say, I made one executive decision that killed me. I played Foreman over Hubbard, and it didn't murder me, right? I put up like 135 or something, but considering I play all head to heads, like that change probably nets me another like 3-4% or something like that.
Right.
And the reason why I did that was because every once in a while, like I don't do it very often, but I do it when there is a situation like where we had Raheem Mostert and Chuba Hubbard across from each other. If I have Deontay Foreman in a spot where there's basically no other running back on the depth chart except Darrynton Evans up against Minnesota, who now doesn't have Justin Jefferson, I think that game is more competitive and there's a better chance for the Bears to end up having a closer game script than Chuba Hubbard, who only really got there because of the touchdown on the first one. And in my analysis video on Saturday, I said verbatim, the only way that I can see Hubbard killing me this week is if he scores the first touchdown. And then he scored the first touchdown.
That's exactly the reason. I had a choice between when I ran top 20 lineups in aggregate, I saw a bunch of 49ers defense lineups, and I saw Hubbard and not all of them. And my attitude when it comes to especially the running back position, or any position practically, is that when in doubt, 50-50, take the teams that are favored to win,
right? And
score points, score touchdowns more. Like people always, I'm going to play the quarterback that's going to be behind all game. It's like you make points on efficiency and scoring touchdowns and stuff. Right? So like Chuba Hubbard, the Panthers were a big road underdog. Yeah, he's cheap on another slate where there's very thin value. If, let's say Mostert was 8,500 this slate. He was on FanDuel. Like Chase was up to like 9,200, where you're probably just playing Cooper Kupp instead.
Right.
Christian Kirk was 6,300 instead of 5,400. Right. Next thing you know, it's like now Hubbard's going to be in a lot of these lines now at 4,400, 4,300, whatever he was. It's like, okay, I'm playing the underdog, cheap running back, and whatever happens. I didn't see a need to. Like in the top 20 lineups, Chuba Hubbard was only in 12 of them. And 8 of those 12 were 49er defense lineups. So it's like once you take out the 49ers defense and you plug in the Bears, the Lions, the Buccaneers, Hubbard doesn't appear in any of those lineups anymore, right? Because we have Jacobs and Williams and Montgomery and Mostert and Kamara and all those 6K running backs that are almost all of them were underpriced to some degree.
It was a great mid-range week for running backs. It was great.
Right. And it just depends on which mid-range running backs you selected. If you selected Kyron Williams, even at the half, James, he had 0.4 points. at the half. Because
know.
the Rams only ran. I mean, the Rams ran what 16 plays in the first half.
16 plays, dude. 16 plays in the first half. That's bad. And then
they just fed him the ball. And
salvaged
then in the second half, they just came out and just literally said, "We're giving you the ball every play."
right. And look, 158 yards, touchdown.
Right.
Yeah, it was. And when I just reran things as well, based on the same ownership stuff, like I do use the highest projected, highest owned lineup in my runs. So I don't just use the highest projected ownership. The highest projected ownership lineup actually had both Foreman and Hubbard and the 49ers defense. And like I didn't have any need to do that. So I did end up paying up at certain spots. Just ended up, I don't know. I looked at that lineup and most of the things just made sense in terms of how they turned out. I think the majority of it, was it Trevor Lawrence and Etienne that just ended up outscoring Kamara and Stafford by however much? It feels like it was just Etienne versus Kamara, and that was the 1v1 that I lost this week. Because everything else, like when I look at it, I think cash lineup is fine.
No, your cash line was fine. I mean, it's close. That's why I said there are many combinations of very similar style lineups that all project within a point of each other. That's fine. I'm bringing up results DB. You can obviously get this at RotoGrinders.com, powered by Fantasy Labs. This is free. You don't have to be a RotoGrinders premium member or anything. So go to RotoGrinders.com/resultsDB. We do not have the update for the afternoon games in, so I can't show the Rams. So it's a little. That's the main reason I'm not really looking much at it right now. The only noticeable thing that I could see when we move over to GPPs is that, I mean, do people just people don't think recency bias exists, and the lower stakes you go, the more it does. But let's just say that my ownership manual changes did not bump up. I mean, I didn't play it. I played 10 GPP lineups, and I didn't play Justin Fields in any of them, but Justin Fields was the highest owned quarterback, and DJ Moore was 25% owned in the millie. And let's just say that even accounting for recency bias, I projected his ownership to be.
This week was wild from ownership perspective, dude. That there were, I mean, I had in cash or in small field, I had Raheem Mostert projected for 50% owned, and that came through. I did not.
No. So what are you saying? So Mostert, well, also Mostert came in on the millie at almost 55% ownership.
Yeah,
and I had him at like 32.
Yeah, in large field, I had him projected for 27%. So double that.
Just double that. I mean, that's you're off by double. But the byproduct of that is that all the other running backs in that range, just all. I mean, like, dude, in my 10 lineups, I played Raheem Mostert in 5 of them, but I also played Kyron Williams. I played Jacobs. I played Montgomery. I played Etienne. I played Kamara. I mean, I played all the guys that were in that range. It's just that the ownership on all those guys just was lower. I mean, like, I didn't expect. See, the thing is, the weird thing is that, like, Kamara got the ownership, and all the other guys didn't. Like, dude, Travis Etienne was 8.8% in the million.
Yeah,
I had him projected for 18. Right? Joe Mixon came in at 6. I had him for 14. Right? Kenneth Walker came in at 6, and I only had him at like 8. Yeah. So, like, it didn't affect him. Bijan Robinson I had at like 6, and it didn't affect him. Right? Like, some of these, I mean, obviously we don't have the late games in here as well. Like, for Jacobs came in at like 6% owned, and I had him for like 12. So it's like all of that, but it didn't matter because, I mean, Mostert scored 37 points. So,
right.
But from an ownership perspective, like, I take a look at my lineups, and it turns out I would have done worse, right? Because had I projected Mostert for 55% ownership, I probably would have had him in like 2 out of my 10 lineups, and my 2 most contrarian lineups only. And then I play a little bit smaller field, 5,000 entry type of stuff. But in GPP, what were you most focused on for your GPPs in your GPP lineups?
Miami mostly. But when I say Miami, I mean Miami as a whole. So I had 5 lineups this week for GPPs, up a little bit from the 3 lineups that I usually play for reasons that are very annoying. But I played and said that my biggest priority was getting a Miami stack because of the ownership on Raheem Mostert. And
Okay,
then
so what contests are you playing? Are some of these lineups in what, the power sweep or
I
something?
only played the Millie and the
Oh, so
30.
you threw these in the Millie also, so I could find them here.
Yes, you can find those.
Even though even though the late games aren't
Right.
in. Now this is the 555. Sorry.
Yeah. I have an issue with my deposit limits on DraftKings right now. So I had like $900 in my account or something like that to play this week. So I had regged all of my head-to-heads, and then I had that deposit issue, and I was like, oh, cool. Well, I have like $200 for GPPs, so I guess I'll just throw them in the Millie.
Right. So
but
some
I
of these
had
aren't
one-
complete lineups because we don't have the late games in.
Right. So it's not even. I had a Miami stack, and then in all 4 of my other lineups, I had Mostert. I thought that it was really important to get access to either Mostert or Miami stacks. And because I built,
you played Cedric Wilson.
I did play Cedric Wilson. Yeah, who got 0, which was awesome. Scored 42 points. He gets 0. But in those lineups, I had a Miami stack, and then I thought that it was really important to have a Philadelphia stack and a Ram stack. Those were kind of the 2 other best teams to stack. And then I had a Cincinnati stack, and I had a Tampa Bay stack. And both of the Cincinnati and Tampa Bays were overloaded with QB 2+2. Just
right,
hoping
so you played both Metcalf and Lockett on the way back.
Yeah. So I just tried to take advantage of what I thought were probably the best upside environments based on price and passing rate for the teams. This was a really hard week for GPPs to find game environments to exploit, though. In weeks past, there have been like some really, really good spots to take advantage of. And this week, I mean, Miami with a really high team total was really nice. And you could bring back Thielen, who the industry is still way too low on. But outside of that, it was like, okay, well, you have the Rams, but they're facing the Cardinals. And you have Philadelphia, but they're facing the Jets. And then you have Cincinnati, who has a weirdly low over-under up against Seattle, and that came through. And then you have Tampa Bay versus Detroit, where Detroit might just have a lead and then just run it out on them. It was a weird week for finding like upside game environments. And a lot of people were on the Indianapolis-Jacksonville game, mostly because of price, I think, is what most people are saying. But I wasn't even really into that game. I was fine with some of the pieces. I was fine with Josh Downs. I was fine with Evan Ingram and maybe a little bit on Kirk, but I wasn't really super into the game environments because I didn't think that I just thought that I had a high probability of letting down based on how many people were on it because it wasn't sneaky. If that game had no ownership, it was one thing, but it was just getting a lot of chatter. So I didn't think that was good. It was kind of hard GPP week to find those game environments, but the one-off pieces were so easy. The running back, like you had so many good running backs. You had so many good one-off pieces with like Adam Thielen and we had in those game environments, you have Josh Downs, you have Michael Pittman, you have Evan Ingram. If you want to, like, you had so many good one-off pieces that it made up for the bad game environment. So it was kind of a weird week for building for me. I prefer to focus on game environments, but I think it turned out okay. In GPPs, I mostly broke even. I lost a little bit of money in cash, but I mostly broke even in GPPs.
I focused on 2 games, but I had lineups in a bunch. So, I mean, my best lineup was one of the games I focused on, but primarily in stacks.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't want necessarily a piece. The only piece that I didn't mind having on its own was Bijan Robinson. But my best lineup was a Desmond Ridder lineup. Ridder, London, Pitts, McLaurin, run back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then I take a look at this lineup. I mean, this is how I build GPP lineups. I'd look at Ridder, London, Pitts, McLaurin. Do I have to worry anything about about ownership in that stack? No.
Nope.
So you know what I do? I play Etienne, I play Mostert, I play Chase, right? I play Jacobs. Then I have Cardinals defense left. I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm playing Mostert in this lineup. I don't mind playing a one-off Chase in this lineup. Like Chase and Mostert are two of the most owned players, but in a Ritter stack like this, no problem. And of course, Etienne, I had projected to be like 18% owned, not 8% owned. So, like, there you go. This is lineups, not players. Okay? So, another lineup I played one Carr lineup. Carr, Olave, Thomas with Damian Pierce, who I guess is dead now. But here's another thing. You can play Mostert in this lineup. I mean, because could be Travis in chat is asking, like, could you discuss being 50% owned in the Millie? Mostert, right? We're talking about lineups, not players, right? Lineups, not players. Now, in this lineup, look at the ownership in the rest of my lineup. I could play Cup. I could play Mostert. I could, like, dude, once you do that, play the highest projection. There you go. Done. Another lineup. This is my Tua lineup. I had two Tua lineups. This lineup, Tua, Hill, Smythe. If I'm punting a tight end, I'm just gonna punt in whatever the hell happens, right?
Right.
Then Williams, and then this is the way to play Hubbard, right? Right? You could play Hubbard here, right? And then instead of playing Downs, you play Kendrick Bourne at 3% owned, right? This is the lineup that you don't play Mostert in, right? So you play Kyron Williams at higher ownership, right? You can play Christian Kirk's in this lineup. He's a high owned player, but once I'm playing no Mostert, right? And I'm playing David Montgomery and Kendrick Bourne. You could play these guys in this lineup. I'll get to those, and then I had super stack Tua, Waddle, Smythe with both Hubbard and Thielen. So it's like I want the whole game.
Yeah.
Right? But this is a non-Mostert lineup. Of course, if I played Mostert instead of Mixon here, it would have been much better. And I just had all the Dolphins. But look, I'm playing 5% on Waddle in a correlated way. I could play Kirk in this lineup. Right? I can play the Lions defense at a little chalky defense, right? Like, it's lineups, not players. And this is not like I'm not hand selecting these things. I'm just running through lineups and lineup HQ and looking for these comments and go, oh, okay, this looks interesting. This looks fine. I'm taking one of these. I'm taking one of those. Then we get to the other game that I was targeting, because I said it was a high variance game. That was the Raiders Patriots game. So Garoppolo, Adams, Meyer at 0.3% owned. Right? Because I'm just throwing in a tight end, and I'm playing Kendrick Bourne as a run back there. I could play Mostert in this lineup. I could play Kyron Williams in this lineup. Instead of playing Kirk, I play Calvin Ridley. Play the Vikings defense. There you go. And then the craziest lineup is this one. The game stack lineup. The maybe Mac Jones corrects himself lineup. I had to take a shot. It came up.
You didn't have to take a shot.
No, but the whole point was in that game. I wanted the game, or I wanted nothing. I either wanted Jacobs as a one-off, or maybe Bourne as a one-off. But if that game went off, I want all of them. So Mac Jones with Bourne, Parker, and Gesicki, Jacobs and Adams, and then this lineup looks very good after the 1 p.m. games, because the only two players in it are Mostert and Tyreek Hill. And I go, give me the Dolphins. The Dolphins truck the Panthers, and then late game hammer. Give me everything. Give me a 36-30 game with the Eagles defense against the Jets. Right?
I'm gonna agree with Could Be Travis on this. 22 QBs on this slate, baby. You didn't need to use Mac Jones.
Well, the only way for me to afford all these people, I had to get Adams and Hill and
play,
Jacobs and
play
Mostert.
a backup quarterback. It's gonna be better than Mac Jones. You could have played Malik Willis there. He gets benched, and then Malik Willis runs for 2 touchdowns.
I took a shot. Is it something that's going to be in a multitude of my lineups? No, but this lineup in and of itself, why the hell not? right? I played the Sam Howell lineup on the other side of the Atlanta game. So Howell, Samuel, Thomas, right? And Bijan Robinson. Because Bijan Robinson has the way that he scores points, like he's like Kamara. So like I want to focus on those guys. I don't want to play Brian Robinson.
Yeah.
I want to play Bijan Robinson. I want to play those types of running backs.
Well, and then Brian Robinson caught the touchdown. So maybe you should have played Brian Robinson in this lineup, right?
With his 4% target share.
Yep. Results, baby. Results.
Right. Or play both the Commanders running backs.
There you go.
What was my worst lineup?
You should have played both of the Commanders running backs and then brought it back with Bijan Robinson.
So this is my worst lineup. Stroud, Collins, Woods.
That's maybe one of my favorite lineups that you have shown.
And it did the worst. Right. Etienne, Kamara, because I just avoided the Dolphins game completely. And then still ate the 49ers job.
Stroud made a lot of sense, and then had his worst game of the season.
Right. And then I played one T-Law lineup because he was going to be owned enough and the pieces fit together. I was under on if I had a lot of lineups, I would have been way under, but at a 10 from a risk management perspective, it's like I'm already playing Kirk in some lineups. I'm playing Ridley in some lineups. I'm playing, I'm playing Etienne. Like, why not at least build Lawrence? Right. But instead of building it with Kirk, I built it with Ridley. So Lawrence, Ridley, Ingram with Downs. And then because I'm playing, that combination, it's like, well, you can't play Mostert. I'm not playing Mostert in this lineup. So it's like Bijan, Damian Pierce, Kyron Williams, and Myers here is a one-off instead of Marquise Brown or Adam Thielen. And then just I'll play the Dolphins defense because maybe that Bryce Young throws 2 pick sixes and that's how the Dolphins score. And that's the only Dolphins that matter.
Yeah. To speak really quick to the 73% on high stakes. So there have been, how should I say this? One of the best things you can develop as a DFS player is an understanding of when a high-owned player is just a really, really good play and when a high-owned player is somebody that you should avoid to find leverage.
I disagree. I think that's a horrible way of putting it.
I think that it makes sense.
I may agree with you, and I keep on saying this week after week. There's no such thing as good chalk. There's no such thing as bad chalk.
Yeah.
Whether or not he's overowned or underowned.
Yeah.
If Mostert was 99% owned in your contest, he's almost certainly overowned.
Yeah.
But let me put another sentence in. We have to explain this time and time again. This is in the first course. This is in the second course. This is one of the most important concepts in all of DFS, playing GPPs.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as good chalk or bad chalk. I'm going to repeat it again. There is a thing as overowned and underowned. And what that does, the byproduct of a player's ownership increases or decreases the relative value of your entire lineup. Not of that player, but of your entire lineup. So you can play an overowned player. You're probably only playing because he has a high projection. You're not going to play if people played the 4th tight end on the special teams on the Eagles at 99% owned. That would obviously fit into like the badge. That would like the mass delusion. But we don't get that in DFS, right? Typically, if a player is higher owned, they're typically higher projected to some degree, at least. Okay. So once any player that's high projected is worth playing. Any play, no matter at whatever ownership you play them. But you need to take into account the relative value of your lineup. So let's say, for instance, Mostert is 99% owned. You can play him in lineups because he is the highest projected running back on the slate. But the relative value of your lineup has gone down significantly enough that you need to find more under-owned players to balance that out. Now, if Raheem Mostert was 99% owned and you didn't play him in a lineup, he is so over-owned to the point where once you don't play him, the relative value of your lineup is probably very high as long as you're just playing higher projected players. That's not Raheem. Like at that exaggerated example, let's say Mostert was 99% and Jamar Chase was 99% owned. If you would have X'd out both those players and just literally ran the top 150 optimals, that portfolio would probably be plus EV, right? Because 99% owned in these two players is just obviously for their range of outcomes, egregiously overowned. Now, you could also lock button in Mostert and Chase, even if they're 99% owned. Now, if you run the top 150 optimals, those lineups are way too high owned, right? Because they contain other of the highest projected players on the slate. You're not going to have enough relative value to be plus EV and large and GPPs. So what you would have to do is decrease the ownership of your lineups enough where if you play Mostert and Chase, you're playing Nico Collins and you're playing Chris Olave and you're playing Damian you're playing a 2% on running back, a 1% on defense, a 5% on wide receiver, a 3% on tight end. Like you'd have to do that in order to make up for the negative relative value you're getting from two 99% owned players. And you can do this. Look how many options. You can do that. You have to work hard on doing it. Now, if you X out both of them, you could find the lineup that projects within 1 point of a Mostert Chase lineup that has 200% less ownership.
Yeah.
Right. And that trade-off is worth doing. That in an exploitative sense, heuristically, if they both were 99% owned and you never played both of them in a lineup, you would be building higher EV lineups. And I want to key into the word that I'm using. Higher. Not plus EV, not high EV lineups. I'm talking about higher EV lineups than lineups that you can make with Mostert and Chase. You can still make high EV lineups with Mostert and Chase, but there are more available lineups that are higher EV that don't contain both. So if you were only playing one lineup and you wanted to play the highest possible EV lineup, most likely, if both were 99% owned, you wouldn't play either of them, right? Because you could find lineups that are projected practically the same without 99% owned players. So that's the concept of over-owned and under-owned. So when people talk about, well, he can't play, Mostert was 73% in high stakes is madness. Like, well, one of those if you show me a Mostert lineup that contained that looked like the trains and double ups, then I would say yes, that Mostert lineup is a poor that's a poor lineup. But you could also show me a 73% on Mostert lineup that, if you simulated it out, actually has the highest ROI. Once you take a look at these sim things come out and you start taking a look and people think I'm nuts, James.
Yeah.
4 years ago, I think I coined the thread, maybe even 5 years ago. Play whoever you want. Right? Like you could start with anywhere. There's a plus EV lineup with practically any player in the player pool that's projected to some extent, right? Not 2 points, not garbage.
Sure.
If you go through the sims, you'll see that that's absolutely the case. It's what combination of players that you're playing. So it's not about is Mostert if a defense is 50% owned. Oh, well, you can't play that defense. It's like, of course you can. It depends on the lineups that you're playing them in. And the sims will show it out. You run a simulation of the slate. You'll find tons of 73% owned in high stakes, small field, Mostert lineups that are positive ROI. And you go, well, how is that possible? He's so high owned. It's like, well, yeah, in comparison to the lineup that he's being played in. So that's that whole segment there is go to the court. You'll get more of that theory at DFS.com. But that's the main reason, James, why I know I'm being a little rude by interrupting a point that probably you end up coming at the same exact way that I just said.
Yeah.
Right. And you're nodding ahead. But the words that you use are very important because people just stop at a certain sentence.
Right. So let me
good chalk, bad chalk. They don't understand what that means.
Let me finish what I was going to say then.
Okay.
And reestablish some of the thoughts that I was giving. All right.
Right. But you understand the words. Like, be careful with your words.
Right. I get it. So, as I was saying before, Blender gave a very good demonstration of what it means to be over or undervalued. I think that a really important concept that DFS players need to have is understanding, and I will insert something here, either intuitively or mechanically, how over or under owned a player is, even at ownership. Does that sound a little bit better?
Yes.
Okay. So the thing with Mostert this week, projected at around 30% owned, right? When I ran contest sims for small field and sharp contests over at Paydirt, his efficient ownership was 56% in the contest sims. That's how often he was in winning lineups. So his efficient ownership of 56%, anything under that would mean that he is theoretically undervalued and under-owned. Anything over that would mean that he is theoretically overvalued or over-owned. I use the term theoretically here. It's an important term because these are based on my projections. These are not based on Blender's projections or BK Reader's projections or Uticat's projections, right? Those guys might have had a different efficient ownership. In high stakes, if those guys were to do the same thing and he projected for more than I did, for more than I had him, or the running backs in his price range projected worse, he would have had a higher efficient ownership for lineups. Now, all of that is to say that from a mechanical sense, it was very easy to find that Raheem Mostert should have been somewhere between 50 to 60% owned. I don't think that I was that far off of the industry in my projection for him. So I'm going to guess that most industry projections would have him somewhere in the range of efficient ownership of 45 to 60% owned or something like that.
Right. Just to interject, I had him projected owned at 32.
Mm-hmm.
And I still played him in 5 out of 10 lineups because I had at 32 him to still be under-owned.
Right. So all of that to be said, when you see a player in 73% of lineups, one of the reasons why I said that I was going to play him in anything where I didn't have a Miami stack, there are some heuristic things here that are important as well. When we look at the way that the slate was broken out, when we look at his props, when we look at other things that can lead us to making decisions on running backs and in players in general, his efficient ownership being 55% in higher stakes. Let's say, the $2,200 contest or something like that. It's like 100 people. If somebody is projected at 32% ownership and their efficient ownership, when you run these kind of things, is 55% ownership, you have very little incentive to not play that player in those kinds of contests. At 55% ownership, if you have them projected at 32% ownership, you think that you have a 25% edge on a player, you're probably just going to start with that player. And if you have other lineups, you're going to diversify your portfolio to manage your volatility of your portfolio and your risk. That is how you end up with 73% on Mostert, because most people in high stakes, if it's a 5 max contest or something like that for a 4-figure entry fee contest, most people are going to start with Mostert, and then if they have multiple lineups, the second lineup and the third lineup and the fourth lineup, then they will start making decisions of how much exposure and risk do I want to take on based on this player, even though they are under-owned or undervalued. Most players will continue to play Mostert, and then with maybe their last lineup, and this is just based on what I know of the guys who are playing these stakes, their last lineup in an MME or their last 10%, let's say, that's when they're going to start to diversify a little bit, especially in high stakes. So then they'll have either a Miami stack, or they'll pivot to a Kamara, or they'll pivot to Kyron Williams high owned, but maybe they'll pivot to a DeAndre Swift, who is another player that had a high spread and was on a favorite and has a high rushing touchdown expectation. All of these things matter, but what it comes down to is to wrap a bow on what I was saying, you need to have an understanding, whether it be intuitively or mechanically, of how owned a player should be and whether they are over or undervalued based on their projection.
Right. Over and under owned. Value is more linked to salary.
Sure.
Projection
Over or
versus-
under owned. And when but remember, I speak of ownership as the value of price.
Right.
Remember,
You're talking about the relative value of a lineup. Right.
Right. So on all of that, like it's the reason why in higher stakes these guys have access to and have a process that allows them to derive what the efficient ownership of a player is, whereas in lower stakes players don't have that, or they do but they don't know how to use it, or whatever, right? But that's why we see such wide differences in efficient ownership as you go down in stakes. So that is how you end up with 73% owned in the top. And then you say, but finding a path to first place, to me, that seems like the easiest leverage spot. You're 100% right. You are 100% right. If you fade a 73% owned player in high stakes, you have now, based on the easiest path to first, that is the easiest path to first. It's not the best path, theoretically. It's not the most optimal path, theoretically, but it is the easiest. If a player is 99% owned, like Jordan was saying, if you fade that player, you automatically have the easiest path to first. Because if that player doesn't play, you now basically have an extra player over the entire field, right? But if that player projects for the best value on the slate and one of the best projections on the slate and is underpriced and is only at half of their efficient ownership when you're running out contest sims, while it is the easiest, it is probably also the riskiest and most volatile, and you're not going to realize that EV for a long time, even if you were right about fading them. So there is my full long-winded.
And I agree, and I agree with all of it. Heuristically, we talk in the course, theoryofdfs.com. I talk a lot about it in the advanced course. Methodologies. Blunt methodologies, precise methodologies.
Yeah.
Right. What's the bluntest methodology? I think someone's going to do well tomorrow. For just random ass out of your mouth. Right. Most precise is I got a time machine and I saw what happened tomorrow. Right. That's the most precise. Right. So heuristically, if you were to play exploitatively in a contest where we're making this fictional contest where Mostert and Chase are both 99% owned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a way of figuring out which Mostert Chase lineups are plus EV? Now, there are blunt ways to do it, but you could also simulate, and like Sims would tell you that. Sims would show you that. But do you have a precise way of doing that? Because you're going to need a much more precise way, because just intuitively, these guys are way overowned. Mm-hmm. It would be, I could build a lineup with neither of them and have a high projection and be fine, right? But there is a precise way of, if you wanted to play a whole bunch of Mostert Chase lineups that are plus EV, you can. So if you do not have a precise way of doing so, you're much more likely to make errors, mm-hmm. right? Is my lineup low enough owned, even with these two 99% owned plays? That's where you get into the whole question of how many points do I give up for X projection based, like there's no, you can't do that bluntly. You're guessing bluntly. Precisely, you'd run it through Sims. You'd program something. You'd develop something that would be much more precise. Nerdy Tenor would do that, right? But if you don't have access to doing that, it's like you're much more likely to do bluntly. Well, what's the easiest way to do blunt when two players are 99% owned? It's like intuitively, no, they're over. Like, it's impossible for them pretty much to be under-owned, right? Basketball, different story. Sometimes 99% owned players maybe should be 99% owned. So intuitively that if I just X out Mostert and Chase, I could build any lineup with any players. I could just literally just play the top projected lineup that isn't Mostert and Chase and be confident that had you did it precisely, that lineup would be positive EV. And because you could easily do that bluntly, that's why people do it. That's why people think in those terms of, well, if those guys are going to be 99% owned, I'm just going to fade both of them because they're over-owned. And then you get into arguments on Twitter of when the 99% owned player goes for 40 points and goes, well, you're an idiot for playing them. It's like, no, it's only an idiot if you played them in a lineup that was too high owned to begin with, right? Right? And you could play those guys in any way that you want as long as the lineup makes sense from a relative value standpoint. It's just that when you do not have the precise methodologies and you're leaning on blunter methodologies, just like Travis said, the easiest thing to do is like, I'm just going to fade like the guy that is, to me, obviously over-owned. Now, what happens on the slates where this guy is 22% owned? Should he be 18? Should he be 25? Like, you don't have the blunt methodology doesn't work because it's intuitively, it doesn't. DJ Moore should not be 25% owned in large field GPPs, right? If I project him, I would heuristically just X him out, right? But you don't know what the ownership's going to be. Do you know, should Nico Collins should have been 6% or 8%? Should it be 4%? Should it be 12%? Like, if you don't have a precise way of doing that, you're kind of guessing now. So when you say the easiest leverage spot, that's what we're talking. Intuitively, it's like, dude, I know that if I have these 2 jars of lineups, all these marbles, right? I have all these lineups that don't have the highest owned player in it that I know for sure is over-owned. I could grab my handful and almost certainly have most of these lineups be plus EV marbles, right? And then you have this jar that has lineups that have the 2 highest owned, the 2 99% owned players. And it's like there's 1,000 blue marbles and there's like 3 green marbles in there, right? So those 3 lineups, those are the plus EV lineups. But unless you have a way of really seeing which one's the green ones, you're going to grab a handful of those and most likely get negative EV lineups. But the other jar, it's like it's full of green marbles and it has like 3 blue marbles. And it's like the likelihood of me picking one of the negative EV lineups is so smaller. So like, if you have no precise way, if you don't have the little crane, the little tweezers that could get that green marble, and you just have your handful, which jar would you rather put your hand in? Mm-hmm. I'd rather put my hand in the one that doesn't contain the obviously over-owned player.
And this is, I'm going to wrap up 2 things with a bow here because I know that we got to end things up. But this is why we always talk about identifying what the most important spots on the slate to get right are. Talk about that a lot of like, you don't really need to make 100 decisions. You need to make like 5 decisions per slate. And then that'll give you a good starting off point. And the second point is, I don't care what anybody says. You should never play 50% on defense. You just shouldn't. I'm going to die on that hill forever. It's always
Sims would say otherwise.
The Sims would not say otherwise. And I promise they wouldn't say otherwise. Anyway,
well, maybe not 50%, but whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Depends on the lineup that you play. It's the same.
No, it doesn't. 50% on defense is bad. Carry on.
Well, it's primarily because the fragility of the projection is
right, like, because the standard deviation between each defense is like overlap. It's like a Venn diagram. Every single one is just within the same one. Like they're all the same. Anyway, let's
go. So James, people could follow you on Twitter, Pater_DFS, PaterDFS.com. You got stuff over there. You got content over there, right?
Yep, got both those things. Getting ready to start putting together the NBA stuff. That's really, really exciting. So pretty excited for NBA.
Aren't you excited for updating projections 74 times?
I'm not going to have to this year. It's going to be mostly automated. So I'm excited.
Okay, we'll see how that works. So we got NBA stuff coming. You never know. I don't know.
Yeah.
We got NBA stuff coming up next week, right? That's coming back here on RotoGrinders. Click on the link in the description. Get $10 off your first month. We got NHL. I've been using the NHL projections for prop betting, college football projections. We got everything for you here. We'll hopefully be coming out with that sim thing. I don't know when it's going to be public or anything, but I'm just giving you a little bit preview. And yeah, I'll be back tomorrow. We'll be talking about some props and pick 'em. We got some MLB playoffs. We got a little bit of hockey. Tuesday's going to be a light day, but send in your questions to the mailbag. Questions@theoryofdfs.com. I got some in there. Maybe we'll do a mailbag episode tomorrow. So send them in, questions@theoryofdfs.com, and I will answer them, as well as anything you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick'em. Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern on RotoGrinders Today.